For the past few weeks, we have been looking at the statements that Jesus made at the very beginning of the Sermon on the Mount on blessed are. And then as he goes through, we have been looking at the different terms that he describes. The end of the sermon makes these words yelling out loud and clear to us. If we hear these sayings and we do them, so if we have incorporated into our spiritual foundation the words of the lesson this morning, then we're building our house on the rock. And when the winds come and the rains come, when death comes, when we stand before God on the final day, we will be considered wise. But if the things that we're talking about this morning are not yet a part of our daily life, even though we've been a Christian for many, many years, if we find ourselves saying, oops, that's something I still need to work on, that's something I still need to do, then we'd have to agree we're not doing them. Jesus said, if you hear these sayings of mine and you are doing them, you are wise. If you are hearing these sayings of mine and you are not doing them, then you are foolish. So if we can see spiritual growth, maybe you heard this sermon 10 years ago or 5 years ago. We taught a class on this, I think, in 2013 and 14, so you've heard it since then. But are there any changes? Are we making any moves in the right direction? Jesus says if we have these things, we should be regarded as happy, fortunate, in view of our favorable circumstances. Greek-speaking people use this term to describe people who are blessed with beauty or wealth or prosperity or a good job or circumstances that make them feel or look important to other people. And Jesus says the honor that these secular things bring to man in this world, I can promise you, I can assure you as a son of God, that if you have these 8 qualities, when you stand before God on the judgment day, you will be considered very fortunate. Now, that ought to be enough to give us our motivation to work on these things. So, the one that we want to look at today is, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be filled. Righteousness is a complicated concept only if we start trying to make it complicated. It's actually very, very simple. As a matter of fact, our earliest experience with righteousness is when, as children, we learned the rules from mom and dad and the discipline when they were disobeyed. And that's all we needed to understand about righteousness. And it was very fascinating that when punished fairly, we accepted it as the just consequence of our selfish actions. We knew that what our parents was asking was fair. We knew that it was just. We understood, and we knew that if we disobeyed it and we got caught, that we deserved to be punished. But the interesting thing about righteousness is that if we got caught, but we hadn't done it, if the circumstances were set up in such a way that we were being punished unfairly, we understood what righteousness and unrighteousness are. We understood that we were not being treated fairly. And to this day, I mean, if you're with a group of kids and something happens, they understand when something is fair and when something is not fair. They understand that that's not fair. And it isn't. Well, why isn't it fair? Because you're taking something from me that you don't have the right to take by injustice. You're spanking me when I don't deserve to be spanked. You are punishing me or penalizing me. Or maybe it's another child who has taken something that is mine and has destroyed it or damaged it or won't give it back when they promised they would give it back. That's all that we really need to understand about righteousness. It gets more complicated when you start talking about complicated things, but it's really still the same thing. If somebody commits a murder, that's not fair, the family cries, because you have taken something very precious that shouldn't have been taken. And if somebody tells a lie about me, that's not fair because you have damaged my reputation with something that never occurred. And if you commit adultery with my wife, that's not fair because you have stolen something from me that cannot be returned and that is intimately precious. And if I do something to God, that's not fair if I change His worship, if I take His name in vain. Why? Because I've stolen something that doesn't belong to me and I can't give it back again. And so, clearly, visceral emotions exist. Now, the word visceral is used by people when they want to describe something that you just don't have any control over, your body takes over. The viscera is this part of our body right here. The Greeks called it the bowels. And it's where the strong emotions were housed. And when they talked about the bowels of compassion, they were talking about that viscera, or that part of your body that takes over. You just feel this stomach ache. You feel this sense that wasn't fair. It wasn't right. It wasn't just. And so joy and satisfaction when treated fairly, anger and outrage over injustice. That's all righteousness is. Do you hunger and thirst for that? Now, we naturally do when it comes to our things. The problem is with the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have others do unto you. If it's not fair for you to take it, or for me to take it from you, is it fair for you to take it from me? It's not fair for you to do this to me. Well, then righteousness would demand that it's not fair the other way around as well. So righteousness is more than justice and fairness and judgment because it's personal. It's personal. With God, it's personal. If I blaspheme Him, that angers Him. That hurts Him. That disappoints Him. Just like that little kid who took my toy. And it angers me. And it hurts me. And I want it back because it's mine and it's fair and it's just. That's all righteousness is. But it's a manner of life where all interactions, all my relationships with you are fair. And if you go back through it, you say, Alan's a good man. He never treats me unfairly. He always gives me what is mine, and he doesn't take what belongs to me. That's what righteousness is. That's the just man that Paul said in Romans chapter 5 someone might die for a just man. Somebody who's always fair, who never takes anything that belongs to you. Never. We recognize the needs of others and we treat them with respect. And so when somebody took something of ours, once again, there was outrage. Visceral, uncontrollable response because we know that's mine. You just took what was mine. And as I say, it's more complicated in the spiritual realm. It's more complicated as we become adults because now the entire Old Testament and New Testament teach. One of my last verses on the slides, which we'll get to after a while, is going to be that all Scripture is given by inspiration of God and is profitable for doctrine, for reproof, for correction, for instruction in righteousness. So the whole concept of righteousness is complicated because I oftentimes don't know what's mine and what's yours and where I'm intruding and taking because I just don't see it. I don't see it. It's interesting, though, I usually see it if you do it to me. But if I do it to you, then I don't see it. So this is what we have to understand about righteousness. And if you've forgotten, just watch kids. Go watch how kids interact with each other. They know what righteousness is. And we know what righteousness is. It's just fairness, equity, justice. Not taking what belongs to others. Not having others take what belongs to me. Not giving to God exactly what is His and not taking anything from here. And that's unrighteousness. It's just the opposite. It's doing that very thing. So if we could only hold on to this, but we didn't. Now, it's fascinating. We did in most things, most sins that you read about in the Scriptures, we are righteous. We understand the fairness of them. But then those weaknesses that we have, that's where our unrighteousness comes in. That's where we can't see that it's not right for me to take this from somebody else. And so when someone is angry, they often will take the dignity of another person. They will berate them. They will malign them. They will call them names. They won't turn the other cheek. They won't go the second mile. They will take more. It's not so much what's fair. Now we want to take more than what's fair. And so when it comes to righteousness, it has to do with the way that we deal with people. So the definition of the term captures all of this. Integrity. What does integrity mean? It means I'm always fair. I'm always upright. I always give people what they deserve. I never take what doesn't belong to me. I'm always reliable and trustworthy in all interactions. If you tell me a secret, I won't tell anyone because I have integrity. But I really won't tell anyone because it wouldn't be fair for me to tell anyone because I told you I wouldn't tell anyone. Virtue and purity of life. Virtue means I want to be the best that I can possibly be. And in the context of righteousness, it means I don't want to take what doesn't belong to me. I don't want you to be hurt so I can have what I want. I don't want you to feel harmed or maligned or mistreated or stolen from. Wow, Alan's virtuous. Why? Because he doesn't want to hurt other people. And he doesn't want to hurt God. That's all righteousness is. Purity of life, uprightness, correctness in thinking, feeling, and acting. But it all goes back to what we were as children. If we're treated unfairly, we scream, that's not fair. If somebody takes something that belongs to me, we'll scream, that's mine. What we're saying is, I want righteousness. And what we have to learn is to give that same righteousness to other people. Treating the needs of God and man fairly, with justice and equity in our thoughts, our words, and our deeds. How bad do we want that? How bad do we want to be fair and just? How bad do we want no one to ever say, that's mine, when we took something? Or that's not fair, when we mistreated them? We know when it happens to us. The question is, do we know when we've done it to someone else? Because that's what repentance is a recognition. I just took something that doesn't belong to me. Well, that's huge. It's more than just, I mean, you could take the tank. I think I do in the next slide, so let me not get ahead of myself here. Every sin cheats someone of something precious. Now, sometimes it takes a little ingenuity or a little intelligence or a little spiritual wisdom to see that. But there's not a command in the Scriptures where somebody isn't saying, that's not fair. Cheated of possessions, stealing and coveting. Our integrity, bearing false witness. Our life, murder. Our spouse, adultery. Our souls, false teaching. Our peace, anger. Those who recognize this and want to be fair are acting righteously, while those using lust and selfishness to take what they have no right to have, those people are unrighteous. Now you can go through the Ten Commandments and you can see it very clearly. In the first 4, we have things that belong to God. The 7th day was God's. Don't work on it. Don't do anything except what I tell you to do on it. That's my day. I gave it to you. It's a day of rest. Don't take my name in vain. I will not hold you guiltless if you take my name in vain. Don't bow down to a graven image, which is nothing, with the honor that should be mine. And don't have any other gods before me. That's all righteousness is giving God what's fair. When Nadab and Abihu offered strange fire, they were acting unrighteously. They were giving something God didn't ask for. They were not manifesting. Remember what Moses told Aaron? This is what the Lord meant when he said, I will be regarded as holy. I will be treated and glorified. If you take that from me, you're worthy of death. You say, well, that's pretty selfish. No, it's not selfish at all. It's what is just. It's what's right. It's what's equitable. And the same thing with the other commandments in the Ten Commandments. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness. You shall not covet. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not kill. What are you doing? You're taking something precious from someone else. And if we hunger and thirst for this, we're going to be a lot better people because it crushes selfishness. And that's really the issue, isn't it? Selfishness and unrighteousness go hand in hand. Because I really don't care. If I'm selfish, I don't care what you have to lose, as long as I gain. More selfish I am, the less righteous I am. The less hungering and thirsting for righteousness I have. The more agape love I have, it will go in the other direction. So every law God has given fulfills that purpose of righteousness. So let's look at this first verse. The Lord commanded us to observe all these statutes, to fear the Lord our God, for our good always, that he might preserve us alive as it is this day. Then it will be righteousness for us if we are careful to observe all these commandments. Now, it doesn't mean it's going to be imputed to us. It means if we could treat everyone the way the law taught, we would be treating them fairly. We would be taking nothing that doesn't belong to us, and we would be living a fair, just, and equitable life toward God and toward our fellow man. Now, the question Jesus is posing to us is, we don't have this. Let's face it, we don't have it. But how bad do we want it? And how much effort are we expending in our hunger and our thirst to root out those selfish things that we do to other people and to hate them and to want to remove ourselves from them? When we give what God is rightfully His, when we allow man to keep what is rightfully His, then that's what the law was designed to do. And the whole law, the entire law, hangs on this. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. You'll never take what belongs to Him then. You will always treat Him with the proper respect. You will give Him what is due to Him because you love Him. And you'll love your neighbor as yourself, so you will never take what is not yours because that's not fair. You know it's not fair when someone takes it from you. It's not fair if you take it from them. So love your neighbor as yourself and love the Lord your God with all your hearts. And then what does He say? On these two commandments hang the whole law, all the law, and the prophets. And as I said a moment ago, in 2 Timothy 3, the entire Bible teaches the same thing. So it's not a complicated thing here. Righteousness just means I want to be fair and just and equitable in my treatment of other people. I never want to take what belongs to them because it's rightfully theirs. And I don't like it if somebody takes from me, so I know they don't like it if I take it from them. And if I look at it like that, it makes it less palatable. In other words, instead of looking at what I get, if I can start looking what other people are losing, it changes the equation. And it helps me understand more clearly, this is wrong. This is wrong. Even though my fleshly desire is that this happened because it's selfish on my part, but were this to happen, here's what would come from it. And this person would lose something very, very precious. And brethren, how many times have we done that? We have taken things from people. Their comfort, their dignity, their peace, their self-esteem. Because of the way we act, because of our rudeness and our bitterness and our jealousy and our selfishness and our unrighteousness. And it's a lack of love, and it's a serious problem. And again, Jesus isn't dealing with whether we have it or not. His interest is, do we want it? How badly do we want it? Are we hungering and thirsting for this? That's His real question. And that's a question that I would pose to you, is as you look at how you treat other people and how you treat God and how you take from people and God what doesn't belong to you, and you say, well, what are those things? Well, just look at your sins and work them out, because you'll figure it out. Whatever sins you struggle with, as you read through the lust of the flesh in Galatians 5, or as you look at the old man and the new man in Ephesians chapters 4 and 5, or as you look at putting to death your members on the earth in Colossians 3, verses 1 through about verse 8, you start looking at all of those sins, and brethren, every single one of them is taking something that belongs to someone else and leaving them screaming that wasn't fair. And whenever I do that to someone else, God says, that's a sin. Now, do I care? The real question about hungering and thirsting for righteousness is the interest we have in it. The interest we have in treating other people fairly. The interest we have in loving our neighbor as ourselves and loving the Lord our God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength. That's what righteousness infers. Now, God is the objective standard of righteousness. For the Lord is righteous and He loves righteousness. Righteousness and justice are the foundation of your throne. Our outrage over unrighteous treatment reflects His. The next time you wonder, why is God going to be so angry? Just watch that little kid. If you take something that doesn't belong to him, or you punish him for something that he didn't do. And when you see that visceral response, you will understand that's how God feels when I do these things. And I understand now it's perfectly fair. I feel the same way if somebody does that to me. The wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness, which means not treating God with proper respect, and unrighteousness, which means taking what belongs to other people. So created in His image and likeness, unless marred by selfish lust, we want to give fairness and equity as bad as we desire to receive it. Now, I don't think anybody here at this point in the lesson can say, boy, Alan, I just don't understand what you're talking about. I've never felt like people treat me unfairly. Anything anybody wants, they can have. If they want to take that from me, I won't get upset because I'm liberated. Give me a break. There's nobody like that in the world. There's nobody in the world who will like it if you take something precious from them that they want. And that's what this is. And so we can't proclaim ignorance here. We can't proclaim, well, I just don't quite understand what righteousness is. No, you understand it. You understood it perfectly. You've understood it ever since you were a child. Now, you may not want to make this application, and so you're kicking and screaming and saying, well, I just can't see it. I just can't see it. Yeah, you can see it. You can see it. And the question is, not the areas where we already do it. So let's just turn over to Galatians 5 for a minute. I just want to read this verse, and I want you to think about what we're taking. In Galatians 5, he starts with sexual things. And there can be no doubt the hurt that a husband and a wife feel involving these things. And so there's no innocent person when it comes to these things. Someone is losing something very precious. So when we look at Galatians chapter 5, verse 19, adultery, fornication, uncleanness, and lewdness, these are all 4 sexual sins, and there is no one here who doesn't understand how selfish these things are. Then he moves to idolatry and sorcery, which again are selfish in what they take from God and what they take from others. With sorcery, you're deceiving people into thinking you have something that you don't have and that you can give them something that you don't have to give. Hatred is taking somebody's right to enjoy their life and right to have a good life and saying, if I could stop that, I would. If I could damage them in any way, I would. Contentions, fightings. Nobody likes to have angry words thrown at them. Jealousy. Nobody likes what people do when they're being treated with jealousy, when they're being treated unfairly, when emotions are aligned that shouldn't be there. Outbursts of wrath. Whoever is the recipient of this wrath is paying a serious cost. Selfish ambitions are wanting to take what other people rightfully have, and I want to get that from them. I'm selfish. I don't care that they deserve that promotion. I wanted it. I have a selfish ambition. Dissensions and heresies, which have to do with people who just can't get along with each other, and if they can't get what they want, they're going to create turmoil. They're going to stir up strife. They're going to say mean things to people. And they're going to create dissensions. And so we could just keep going on these, but I think you see the point. Now, if you don't have this sin, you understand perfectly what I'm talking about. But if you have it, you don't. And that's the fascinating thing about righteous. I can be righteous. It's kind of like James said, you can keep the whole law, but if you're guilty in one point, you're guilty of all. Why? Because you won't want to do all of it. Nobody wants to commit every sin in the Scriptures. They would be sick. They would be sick because they'd be doing things that would violate their conscience. They'd be doing things they don't want to do. They would be doing things that make them ill and make them sick. But when it's my selfish lust, now I don't care anymore. So this hungering and thirsting for righteousness, brethren, it's just a very narrow part of your life. It's just that part of your life where you're struggling with these things. There may be 5 things. There may be 10 things. There aren't 1,000 things. There aren't 50 things. Usually we struggle with a small cluster of sinful weaknesses that we opened up doors when we were young and that we still struggle with. But if we're hungering and thirsting for righteousness, we want to close them. And we want to remove them. So righteousness is called in the Scriptures the dividing line between a child of God and the child of the devil. In this, the children of God and the children of the devil are manifested, or are manifest. Whoever does not practice righteousness is not of God. We have to learn fairness, especially fairness in those sins that we struggle with. And we have to begin to replace the selfish desire with what we're taking from someone else. And we have to start seeing, this is unrighteous. Viscerally, it's unrighteous. This isn't something I can be doing. Because if I feel this way and I act on it, I'm taking something that belongs to someone else. And I won't do that. And Jesus says, if you hunger and thirst for that, you're going to be full. You're going to be filled. Whoever does not practice righteousness is not of God. If you know that He is righteous. Now, that's one thing about God. He's always fair. He's always just. That's what I like about God. You know the statement, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely, but not God. God has absolute power, but He's never unfair. He's always fair. He's always just. I have absolute expectations. I would just never even consider that God could be unfair. Would never even enter my mind that God could be unfair. If you know that He is righteous, and I do, and you do, you know that everyone who practices righteousness is born of Him. If we're not like this, then we have another father. He who practices righteous is righteous just as He is righteous. But Jesus told the Jews, you are of your father the devil, and the desires of your father you want to do. Now, the devil is selfish. And he likes to take things that belong to other people. He took Adam's life and Eve's life. He took their souls. He damaged and destroyed God's plans, God's material creation. He didn't have a care for any of that. He knew that's what would happen, but he didn't care. As a matter of fact, it seems like that's why he did it, because it would hurt God, because it would hurt Adam and Eve. He was a murderer from the beginning. He was a liar in order to create murder. Why? Because he was unrighteous. Why was he unrighteous? Because he didn't care. How unfair what he was doing. He knew what would happen to Adam and Eve if they ate of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and yet there he stood saying, you won't die. God, you'll just become like God. You'll know good and evil. You'll know the difference between good and evil. What a terrible lie that was. And what a terrible, terrible thing. That would be the stuff of a terrible movie where a husband and a wife are dealing with one another, and the husband has sinister plans and he sets it all up, and you see this movie and you just want to vomit. And yet that's what happened in the material creation. And so in 1 John 3, God simply wants us to understand, if you don't practice righteousness, that's who you are. You're acting just like Satan. Oh, no, I'm not like Satan. Yeah, you are in this one realm. You want that? You like that? Is that who you want to be like? Is that who you want to emulate? Oh, no, not me. No, you don't have any choice. It's evident. The children of God and the children of the devil are evident. They are manifest. They are clearly revealed. Whoever doesn't practice righteousness. Well, yeah, but I practice righteousness 98.9% of the time. Yeah, well, that's the problem. It's that 1.1% of the time. That's where your problem is. And we need to hunger and thirst for righteousness. And brethren, we need to spare no time or effort to dig these things out of our life and get rid of them. Because these sensual lusts, these lusts that exist in our heart, sensual meaning from our senses, that come because we get pleasure from them. But if we just mark in and add in, okay, if I do this, this is what's going to happen. It's going to hurt this person and this person and this person, and it's going to hurt God. Now, can I still do this in all good conscience? So, are we hungry yet? These teachings ought to create a visceral and uncontrollable response of desire and need, do they? Or do you just say, man, I can't wait to get out of here. Can't wait for this sermon to be over. I don't like this kind of sermon. Well, that's not what it was designed for, and I'd challenge anyone here to say, okay, this is where you went wrong, Alan. This sermon has nothing to do with reality. Those little kids don't care if you spank them, and they didn't deserve it. And I've never seen a child, if you take something that belongs to them, who says, that's mine. I don't understand what you're talking about. No, we understand. We understand. It's just bigger. The concept's bigger. It's not any different. It's just that now sin's involved. Now we're adults. Now we have rationalizations. We have excuses. And we have reasons. And we have blindness and hardness and deadness in our conscience and in our soul. And all of this is involved. And so you're sitting there and you have to make up your own mind how this sermon is touching you. But make no mistake, whatever sins you have, and you know what they are, they're selfish. And you're taking something from God and from your fellow man that you have no right to. And at that point, are we hungry? Jesus says, blessed are you when you hunger and thirst. So hunger and thirst are relative terms or relative needs. Jesus, after a meal, after a few hours, he's going to get hungry. But not like he was after that 40-day fast. So what about you? What's your hunger for righteousness? Is it visceral? Strong? Jesus used a present active participle. So this is continuous. It's kind of interesting about hunger. Every day, it doesn't matter how many times you eat, within a few hours you get hungry. And so righteousness and our desire for righteousness will be a continual need throughout our life. Kind of like Jesus said, man doesn't live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. So he wants us to be the hungering one, or the one hungering. Or he wants us to be the continual thirster, like the runner. The man who is running is a runner. Well, I'm a thirster, and I'm a hungerer for righteousness. That's the present active participle. It means continuous action. It's not something you stop. It's not something you ever get satiated or sated with. It's something you always want. So our righteousness is our personal fairness and equity and treatment of God and man, and just how insatiable is our hunger and thirst for this. Now, it's funny, because if you're talking about me, it's insatiable. I always want to be treated fairly. I always want what's mine. I never want you to take what belongs to me. But now I have to turn it around. So, as Jesus said, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. And I have treasured up your words, the words of his mouth, more than my necessary food. So are we like that? Can we truly say that our interest in God's standards of righteousness are as continual as our daily hunger? Blessed are you who hunger now, for you shall be filled. Woe to you who are full, for you shall hunger. And then there's thirst. True thirst. As the deer pants for the water brooks, so pants my soul for you, O God. My soul thirsts for God. My soul thirsts for you. My flesh longs for you in a dry and thirsty land where there is no water. That's the visceral response that Jesus wants, and that's what we have to work toward. So, do we recognize the dry and thirsty land of unrighteousness we live within? And do we thirst for it? So, summing up the lesson, All Scripture is given by the inspiration of God and is profitable. And see, I skipped over doctrine, reproof, correction. Those are all important, but not to my lesson. My lesson has to do with for instruction in righteousness. So every Scripture reveals how to be fair. Fair to God in worship and godliness, fair to our fellow man in all of our dealings. So here's my last point. The more we hunger and thirst for this, the more we will hate sin, and the stronger our mourning at our lack of meekness over taking from others what we had no right to have will become. And that godly sorrow will keep us poor in spirit. And so as we conclude our lesson, we're now going to pick up our song of invitation, and it's time for you to think carefully about what you've just heard and what you need to do about it. Maybe you don't need to make any changes. Maybe you already hunger and thirst for righteousness, or maybe there's something in the lesson that really pricked you. Go home, make a decision. Somehow or another, I'm not going to forget this. I don't want to hear this lesson in another 5 years and say to myself, I made up my mind I was going to do this 5 years ago. What happened? But if right now in your heart you feel a sting, you feel a pain, you feel a remorse that can't just be dealt with a private prayer, then as we stand and sing, we're going to invite you for the opportunity to either make your life right with God by confessing a sin or being baptized into Christ. And if you have that desire, would you please come while we together stand and sing?